Hello, everybody, and welcome to All Things Rex Worldwide. It's another Thursday, and my guest today is producer, screenwriter Brian Herskowitz, and he's joining us on All Things Rex Worldwide, which is streaming to you on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, Twitter, Periscope, Roku TV. It'll be available and Facebook, and it'll be available for replay when the show completes. So if you enjoy the show, leave comments, make comments, like the show, and you can always talk in the chat room or talk or leave a comment right where you're watching the show from, and share the show. Brian's a producer. He's a screenwriter. He's a film financing expert. He's a teacher. He teaches screenwriting and other things. He's an author, and he comes from a family. His father's a very successful author, and he's an international judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu champion. And we're going to discuss movie making, screenwriting tips, and what Brian has learned from his lifelong passion in the martial arts. So help me welcome Brian. If I can close my windows here. I'm operating without a producer today, and I'm getting a notice that something is having trouble. We're having trouble streaming. This is why I have a producer most of the time. I don't know. I'm just going to allow it to do whatever it does. I'm going to bring on Brian. If it was there, I'm going to bring on Brian because all these things that I'm getting notices of are coming up in front of the window. Brian, Mr. Brian Herskowitz, how are you today, sir?
I'm fine, Rex. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
It's so good to have you. Just so that the audience knows, Brian and I have known each other now. We've decided since about 2013, and might have been 2012. I mean, I don't remember. You could have probably, that's when we first met. Yeah. And the last time I saw you was in Beverly Hills. We were having bagels on Beverly Boulevard quite a while ago.
That's right. Yeah. It's been a little while. It has.
It has. The world has changed in terms of people being able to get together, but it's opening back up. So, Brian, let's recount some of your film history. You've been involved in movies for a long time. Your dad is an author.
Yeah.
Your wife is an actress. You do so many different things. I'd like you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I started out kind of pursuing an acting career as a youngster, and I think it was 1978, moved from Houston, Texas to Los Angeles to pursue that career, and worked a little bit as an actor. Was Willie Ames's drummer on Eight Is Enough in a show called Prom Queen. It was a very famous episode. Did a few things like that, but I wasn't exactly setting the world on fire. And as you mentioned, my father was a writer. And although I enjoyed writing, just because that was kind of what my father did, I always had kind of this resistance to going in that direction. But I had an idea. This is where the convergence of the martial arts and what I was doing as an actor and as a performer came together. In 1980, I was competing in judo and was in the Olympic trials, made it as far as the Olympic trials, and I blew my knee out just prior to the trials, and ended up fighting in the trials, but had to withdraw in the second round. And shortly thereafter, I spent about a year trying to rehabilitate, and then after the year, had surgery. During that time, I had a non-weight bearing cast on my leg for almost a year. And so I wasn't going up for any auditions. I wasn't able to act in anything. And I was sitting around kind of twiddling my thumbs, and I had an idea for a film. So I sat down and wrote it. And lo and behold, a producer who was a friend of mine named Peter Nelson took a look at it and really liked it and said, "Hey, you need to get an agent." He helped me find an agent. That agent immediately said, "Don't give it to Peter, give it to somebody else." And that's kind of where the start of my career happened. And then I really kind of took a back seat. I wasn't really convinced that that's what I wanted to do. I continued to pursue an acting career for a while. When that wasn't working, I was offered a position with a new TV series at the time called Tour of Duty, which was about the Vietnam War. In fact, I think that's it over there. Nope, other side, over there. And I ended up being the associate producer, which is a position that's in charge of all of the post-production, Initially, it was shot in Hawaii, and I would make sure that the film got here and that it was processed and all of that. And then in the third and final season of the show, they asked me if I would rather write or produce. And I said, I'd rather write. And they said, well, too bad, we need you to produce. So they took me on, but they gave me a script to write. And it turned out very well, ended up being one of the higher rated episodes of the year. And because of that and a few other projects that I'd written, I signed with William Morris as a writer. And then that sort of kind of started the ball rolling for me as a writer in my career in television. And then television sort of dried up, and I started working in features. And that came about in part because I was a partner in a company called Artist Media Co-op Productions, which is a New York film production company. And it's kind of the concept behind it was a modern day United Artists. We had Hector Elizondo and Jeffrey Tambor and a few other well-known names that were part of the group. And they brought me on as a writer, but very quickly ended up becoming an executive with the company and the vice president of their creative department. And that got me actually into the producing side, and from there into film finance. And for the last, I'd say 15, 20 years, I've been doing more producing, writing, features, and film finance.
What do you like best?
You know what? That's a good question. You know, there are parts of each of it that I really enjoy. Like with the producing, particularly if it's line producing. And line producing and creative producing are very different things. And you know, that's not something that's kind of generally known to the population at large, because they look at a producer and they think, oh, well, that's the film producer. But there's so many different departments and positions that a producer holds. In television, the producer is usually a writer. The showrunner is usually a writer who really looks after every episode's creative bent. And I love the writing process. I particularly enjoy writing half-hour shows. I was a staff writer on a show called Blossom with Mayim Bialik, and really just had the best time. I love that. That was fantastic. With producing, it is particularly line producing is one of the least thankful jobs that you can get in the film industry, and one of the hardest jobs you can get in the film industry. But there are things about it that are just rewarding and interesting, and I really enjoy the problem solving and the troubleshooting, and the idea that you're faced with something that seems insurmountable. How are you going to fix it? And just as an example, I shot a scene in a laundromat in New York City once, and they had a big table that was bolted to the ground that was in the way. We couldn't shoot around it, and that was our location for the day. And we were trying to figure out how we're going to do this. And I convinced the guy who owned the laundromat that we could unbolt and move this 300-pound table and then put it back. And that's what we did. But that kind of thing where you're trying to figure out how do we talk to the people and get them to give us what we need without breaking the bank or without harming the production in terms of the value. And that's always fascinating to me.
Well, and having that ability to think on your feet and to troubleshoot is what is needed for somebody in that position, you know, and actually in many positions, but particularly a position like that.
Yeah, I always think I have this image of the line producer as the lifeguard whose job it is to spot the sharks in the water. That when there's that they're the ones where they are always on the lookout for where are we going to get screwed next and how do we fix it? And because you never know when an actor is going to fall out, or there's going to be a location that you can't use, or you thought that the sound was one thing and it's something else. So you're always trying to troubleshoot that. And then of course there's always issues with personalities, particularly if you're dealing with any kind of stars, and trying to coddle them and make sure that they're happy. All of that stuff goes into the mix.
So so since we're talking about that, how do you maintain your composure? I've seen you working under stressful situations, in the past.
Yeah.
But to your credit, you were always somebody who was even keel. You always seemed to deal with everyone fairly. You had a composure about you. You may have gone back to the house and tore your hair out, but you never did that in front of anyone. You were always like a good guy.
Yeah.
You know,
I have my moments. I have, there have been times when I've gone off the handle, but generally speaking, two things. I try to treat, whether it's the craft service person or the PA or the director or other producers or the star, I try to treat everybody with the same consideration. To me, the star is no more important than the person that feeds the star. So that's one of the things that helps. The other thing is that I just, and this actually, I think, goes back to the fact that I was trained in martial arts, and that gives you a certain kind of serenity in terms of the way that you approach life in general. So I've always kind of had that fairly easy-go-lucky, slow fuse, hard to rattle in me, but it takes a lot. But I can get there. I promise you, I can get there.
But it is one of those things where I think of line. You said it, but I think of line producing as the most thankless job one of the most thankless jobs on the planet.
Yeah,
it truly is. I was a line producer when I first said, "Oh, we met in 2010." I was a line producer on another film in Florida.
right.
I don't have the same attitude about it or joy about it that you do. I would let me put it this way: if you're a good line producer, you're worth your weight in gold. You know what I mean? I mean, there's always going to be somebody looking for a great line producer. I don't like that job that much. I don't. It's not one.
It's hard. It's not my first choice. My first choice would probably be directing. Those would probably be and not necessarily in that order. I really love directing. I love being at the helm and kind of overseeing the whole process and having creative choices and making decisions about shots and working with actors, talking to them about the role and what part they're doing and how they approach a scene.
The other comment that you made just a moment ago that is really powerful is that whether this is a star or somebody else, they're equal. I mean, you're in it. It's like you're in a boat. You're all going to the same destination. One person, if they're in the front of the boat or the back of the boat, doesn't really matter because you're all traveling to the same place. But where I learned that was realizing that I was watching some movie at some point, and I realized that somebody dug all those ditches, or they had to clean up all the ticker tape, from whatever. Those people were just as important, for making the movie as the people who were acting in front of those ditches or for standing there with the ticker tape falling on them. I mean,
100%. You can't. It's a machinery. It's a village, and you can't take care of one person to the exclusion of all the others. And if you bring one person a chocolate muffin, you better bring everybody a chocolate muffin. That's my feeling. So and those kind of things are always. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you want to make everybody feel like they're valued, and they're not getting the same pay. They're not on the set for the same hours. So that chocolate muffin that you present to that person can be meaningful to them. Certainly more so than the star who's, making 10 grand a week or 100 grand a week or $1 million a week. So it's just a different mindset, and not everybody works that way. I think there are people that go into it thinking my star is the most important thing in the world and I've got to take care of that and everything else can, revolves around it. But that's just not the way I work, because I feel like it is such a communicative and artwork, art form that you really need to have everybody pulling their weight, and you can't be waiting on that one person, like you said, to clean up all the graffiti or the pieces of paper, whatever they're cleaning up. You can't wait for them, and if they're not invested in the job, then you can end up really hurting yourself.
Well, you also as a producer, as a creative producer, more so than as a line producer, but as a creative producer, you have to deal with the personality, the temperament, and the demands of everybody who has felt they've gotten to a certain station where they can make those demands. I mean, there are some celebrities who show up with a 35-person entourage, and they don't work before 11 a.m. and they close at 3, and they want their jelly beans or whatever, and you have to schedule everybody around, and
Yeah.
I mean, people don't understand that it is a manufacturing process, but it's also ego driven in many ways.
Very much so. I haven't had a lot of experience with that with people. Generally, the people I've worked with have been, really super. There are a couple of times when I've worked with an actor or an actress, and names will remain anonymous, who was demanding or had issues. And sometimes it's not their fault. I mean, sometimes it's, they have physical conditions or emotional conditions that really require a certain amount of handling. And sometimes, honestly, sometimes it's not the actor at all. It's their representation that makes demands that, sometimes the actor doesn't even know about. Some things like, well, only green M&Ms in the can, and it's like you go there and you say, I'm so sorry, they had blue M&Ms, no green, and the person says, what are you talking about?
Right.
So I've heard those stories as well. But you do what you can to make everybody comfortable. And yes, there's a point at which you work with people, they're difficult to work with. I have worked with difficult people. I definitely have. And you accommodate them to the best of your ability, but you also have to have a kind of a point where you set a line in the sand and say, I don't cross that line. And
Right.
at that point, if that gets done, then you have to walk away, and you have to be willing to do that financially and emotionally. You have to be willing to do that.
And conversely, there are those people who are really, really big, and they're really, really lovely people.
Yeah.
I mean, you get on set with somebody who's just charming, and they even though their status in life or in the business is highly elevated compared to everybody else, you would never know it.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. And, I've worked with some of those people. I know some of those people, and they're just people. They're just mensches. It's somebody you want to be around, you want to hang out with. They're a delight to be around. So yeah, for sure.
So we have a question, Jake, and something that I was going to ask you about anyway. And you mentioned, in terms of temperament, your practice. But Jake is a screenwriter and a director as well. He's done a number of features. But he said, "What martial art do you practice, Brian?"
I practice judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and been doing judo. I started in 1964, which tells you a little bit about how old I am. And then Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I started about, I'm going to say about a decade ago, about 10 years ago, and had, still compete, still practice, and still beat up from it, but I'm still doing it. In fact, I fought in a tournament a week ago last Sunday, and I'm fighting in one on Saturday. So I still do that.
Right, you are an international champion. I mean, you're not just I
am a yes. In my youth, I was a competitor. That's not a word. I was a competitor internationally in a few tournaments. Actually, I'm doing better now as I'm older in competing in my age and weight group. So I compete in the world masters and world in both judo and jiu-jitsu, and I've had success in both. So I'm very pleased with that. I fought one of my most fond memories recently is I competed in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the IBBJF, I think it's called, the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation Pan American Championships, where I won my division, and then I fought in the open division. And the guys I was fighting were, by the way, you can't tell because I look huge on camera, but I'm about 5'4" and about 135 pounds. And these guys were 250 and 220 and 6'4" and 6'2" or 3, and beat both of those guys. So at on the stand, it looks like there are two adults holding a child. It's very fun. But yeah, I do enjoy it very much. So Jake, if you need a martial artist for one of your films, give me a call.
Oh, he may. He certainly may. The going back, you said that it may be that, and this is what I wanted to ask you about, and also why I said, you were so composed on the set. And I mean, I also appreciate the fact that you said there are times you may want to tear your hair out, but
oh yes,
but given that and what you said about your lifelong journey in martial arts, what would you say how is the philosophy of what you practice helped you with your career or with life in general?
Well, probably in more ways than I'm aware of. There's the fact is that martial arts in general, anything that you reach and try to obtain mastery in gives you a certain amount of confidence and self-worth. And for me, that's where I got my self-confidence. I was a very small kid. I'm a very small adult, but and so I probably could have been bullied, and I wasn't, because I got to a point where people didn't want to bully me. But and so I started judo at 6 years old. I was state champion of Texas by the time I was 8.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've been a competitor for many moons, and it there was always this philosophy of fighting is the last resort, but the confidence of knowing that you had the ability to defend yourself, and that it gave you physical strength, and that you could move, and that you could take on an aggressor, that all helped. But it also there are a lot of tenets in judo, and one is minimum effort for maximum efficiency, and the last part of that is for the benefit of all mankind, and the idea that you're there not to serve yourself but to serve others.
Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, that is absolutely beautiful. And I talk on this a lot, actually. It's the law of the universe is the law of conservation. It's the law of least effort. It's not the universe doesn't do things. I mean, you may have a massive earthquake or a volcano may erupt, but it's not acting massively. It's not attempting to use extra effort. It's just doing the least, and yet the mountain is
it has to do
it. Right.
Exactly.
And it also isn't failing. It's also doing what it does. That's how the universe works. And to be able to interact with other people, using the least amount of effort for the maximum amount of benefit, and then for the benefit of all humankind, is just a wonderful.
When I trained in Japan for a while, and that was on the wall in one of they had one. This is a place called the Kodokan in Tokyo, and it's the place where people go to train in judo, and from all over the world. And they had on the wall, they had that like plaque that said, that had that saying on it, and I would see it every day for a year. Look at it, and it really touched me. Obviously, I still remember it. So it's something that, and this is going back a few weeks, longer than a few weeks, going back about 40 years. So it's something that did affect me, and I do think that my ability to stay calm, and my ability to not to have the slow fuse that I mentioned, is very much associated with the idea that I've trained my life in martial arts. So that's basically what I would say about that. I've and like I said, I continue to train, and it's not only that, but I think that just my life in general, the ability, I've traveled all over the world competing. I've been to Asia, I've been to Europe, I've been to the Middle East, I've been to Mexico, South America. So I've been in Canada, all over the world. And the knowledge that you gain from experiences and from travel, those all kind of, go into the work when you start to write, when you start to direct or produce.
Well, it's amazing. Right now, what's scrolling is your website, brianherskowitz.com. Now, you are also, and we're going to be coming up on a break in about 5 minutes, but on both sides of the break, we can do this. But I'd like to talk about your work as a screenwriter, as an educator, because you teach people screenwriting, but you're also an author, and you've got a number of books. And so why don't you hold up a book right now?
Why? I'm so glad you asked. So this one, let's see if I can do it with that. There we go. This is Process to Product. Let me see if I can get it. There you go.
Oh, you have that book.
Yeah. This is a book on screenwriting. And I started teaching a long time ago. Initially, I was doing classes, just workshops on my own. I'd studied screenwriting for a long time, and not in school, but just professional workshops with different people. And I kind of formulated my own ideas on what makes a good story, and how do you present it, and how do you put it together. So I started doing workshops on how to write a feature film around the country. And then I was working, I'm trying to think of the order of this. I think I was working on Blossom, the half-hour show, and that ended. And Blossom was a terrific show, but nobody in the industry was interested in reading Blossom. It was kind of one of those shows that was very popular in the middle of America and not so hip that people wanted to use that as a sample. So I was kind of stuck because I'd been paid really well to write. And now it was expected of me to write for free. And I was like, do I really want to do that? How do I do this? So there was a group called Writers Boot Camp, which has offices in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. And I called them up. I said, do you have a sitcom class? And they said, well, we're starting one. And I went, okay, great. I took their class. I loved the process that they taught. I didn't think the instructor was very good. And I went to the owner of the group. His name is Jeff Gordon. I said, Jeff, great class. Don't care for the instructor. If you know want somebody who knows how to talk to writers and has gone through the process of writing, let me know. I'd be happy to teach a class. So I ended up doing that and taught about 5 or 6 years sitcom writing for Writers Boot Camp. And then not too long after that, I started working at UCLA Extensions, which is it's an adjunct to UCLA's main campus, and taught there online. That was one of the early online classes. And because it was online, all of my materials were written out rather than lectures where I would talk about them. So my lectures are all written. And after a while, I started going, you know what? And I did that for about 10 years. And after a while, I went, hey, you know what? There's something here. If I could put this all together, my thoughts on how you work from the idea of what you want to write through to the end product, that I could put together a book. So that was the germination of Process to Product, which is a practical guide for the screenwriter. And it is my process taken from, all the different sources that I've learned from and that I've read, and my own experience on how to write a screenplay efficiently and to the best of your ability. And one of the things that I wanted to get away from is there are some books that are extremely, maybe I taught you, Jake, I don't know. There are some books that are extremely limiting. I feel like there's straitjacketing, that you start to write and it says, okay, on page 3, you got to have something. On page 7, you got to have something. On page 9. And it's like, really, if I do that, am I not doing just a cookie cutter? So I wanted to come up with a process where you could follow the string of where you wanted to go without getting lost and yet have the freedom of inspiration. So that was that book. And then this one is called Conceptus. I don't know if you can, there we go. Conceptus. Conceptus is a murder mystery.
Let me do that. There.
Okay, there we go. Conceptus is a murder mystery that I wrote. And this, the way this came about is kind of an interesting story. I was approached by someone from Warner Brothers asking if I would be interested in writing a book. They had an idea based on an article or a documentary. And I said, I'd love to, but here's the thing, you're not going to pay me for it. Anything doesn't happen, it's mine. I'm going to take it and I'm going to run with it. So I wrote the screenplay, was very pleased with the screenplay, but because this gentleman had a deal where he was working at Warner Brothers, he could only take it to Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers passed, and I went, okay, mine. So I took it. And when the pandemic hit, I realized nobody's going to be shooting anything for a while. And I thought, what am I going to do? I'll take the time and I'll write some more scripts. And I didn't have any real inspiration, no ideas right then and there. And I went, maybe I could take one of my screenplays and use it as an outline. So that's actually what I did. I took the screenplay for Conceptus and turned it into a book, a novel. And I'm actually writing the sequel now, which is called Duplicitous. I got Conceptus and Duplicitous. And it's about a woman who is she's a homicide detective from Columbus, who at the age of 14 was in a brutal attack and survived it barely, was in a coma for almost a year. And then 24 years later, there's a series of crimes, and the MO is eerily similar to the attack that she survived. And she has to sort of go back and face her past in order to solve the crime. And that's the story. And I'm very happy with it. The screenplay has actually been a finalist in half a dozen script competitions, and the book has gotten some very nice reviews. And now I'm just waiting for that one producer to come forward and say, okay, you already have the screenplay, let's make it. that'll be great. So that's my next step. Uh-oh, Rex, you are muted, my friend.
Thank you. You know, just as you said that, a sign came down and said, "Mike is muted," and I'm like, but you caught it before that. Before we have to take a break, where can people get the books? There's two of them right now.
Yeah, they're both. Amazon.com has both books. I know for sure. I think the Conceptus is at any place online that you can shop for books. Basically, it's on Barnes and Noble. It's on Book Locker. Any place that if you Google it, it'll come up at a bunch of different places. But Barnes and Noble and Amazon are probably the first line of defense for finding the book. I know that Process to Product was written a while ago, and it's available at Amazon. I don't know if it's other places or not, but those are the two places you can find it. And you can also find links on my website. If you go there and poke around, there is a page specifically for Conceptus, and I think there's also a link on there for Process the Product.
Awesome. I have to take a little bit of a break now. Sure. We'll come back, and on the other side, I want to ask you some more questions about screenwriting, but also about film financing, because you are an expert in that area, and there are always people who are like, "How do I get money for my movie?" And
I'm asking the same questions, by the way.
That's exactly right. So hang in there, everybody. It'll be about a minute, and we'll be right back after this.
Welcome to the Los Angeles Tribune page. Here you will find original news programming, exclusive digital events, and shows that are directly from the community. At the Los Angeles Tribune, we believe in giving a voice to the voiceless. We are proud to be the only national brand to empower everyday people to make a difference. Since 1886, our reputation has been built on truth and responsibility. Thank you for watching and making a difference.
For general inquiries, contact today. Thank you on behalf of the Los Angeles Tribune team.
And we're back.
That was quick.
And I do want to thank Mo Rock and the Los Angeles Tribune and the behind-the-scenes crew that bring these shows to life and help. Even though my team isn't here today, they have been, a godsend. I mean, truly, I appreciate what people do to make things happen. And there's somebody here who's got a comment or question. I discovered a love of writing as I did a blog post 67 days in a row. As I did, Ty Lopez's program of sure, I know Ty. Eventually introduced me to experiencing joy. Awesome.
Very nice.
I think they continued. And I know many poke fun at Ty's to our pre-roll ad. I think it was truly epic. Yeah, I mean, Ty Lopez, for those who don't know, is a force of nature unto himself. He is an incredible marketer and an incredible business person who is he's the guy who had the commercials that showed up in front of YouTube. Here's my cars in my garage and all my books in my garage. And he became a household, name to many in that regard. So very cool. Thank you for sharing that. And but that does address the consistency. I mean, I've written a blog every day since 2009, and in its new incarnation, it's the Gratitude Activator, Daily Inspiration Gratitude, every day since 2014. And having consistency or you talk about mastery, in a martial art or something, is about bringing it, over again. You can't do it once and be a master of a martial art. You can't write something once and consider yourself a master. So I wanted to ask you about this because you've mentioned it and people don't understand. I mean, there's a lot of different producers. That's the creative, executive, financing. There's post-production producers, line producers, associate producers, on and on and on, consulting producers and everything. Well, the same thing might be said in some ways for writing. Mm-hmm. You can write for TV. It can be a union production. You can be in a writer's room, or you can write on spec, or you can write with a contract. So when it comes to writing, can you talk a little bit about the difference between writing for television and writing that spec screenplay, or even if you're hired to write a screenplay, mm-hmm. what differences there are for people that don't understand that?
Yeah, there are some fairly major formatting differences, and there are some fairly major differences in terms of just the job itself. But the story and the way story unfolds, they're very similar. One of the big differences, and it's changed over time, because it used to be that most of television, if not all of television, was network television, which meant commercial breaks, and you would write a story based on how long it was with a certain number of acts, whether it was a 3-act sitcom, a 2-act sitcom, or a 7-act movie of the week. And you would write to those acts, which means that you would write to a point where you would stop and the audience would want to come back after the commercial. And you don't have that in a feature, obviously, because you're not stopping. The action flows through straight on. And, if you've ever watched an old movie on television with commercials, it's irritating as heck, because you get to a point and they break it because there is no natural break in the story. They just break it wherever they have to break it and then come back. And so that's one major difference. The other difference is when you're writing for television, you are writing to a weekly schedule that can be extremely high pressure, because I need to have my scripts done in time for all of the processing and the work and the pre-production to be done. And what happened in network television, where you're every week you're supposed to have a new show, is depending on when you start writing prior to production, you end up eventually not having time to shoot. So you have to have a break. So they used to, do a rerun during the season. That's happening less now, partly because the seasons are shorter. Most shows are doing 13 episode seasons, particularly anything that's not on your 4 major networks, whether it's AMC or TNT or any of those other places. The other thing that's happened is television has also become synonymous with streaming. And when you talk about streaming, really what you're looking at is, instead of it being a 1-hour episodic, you're looking at a 10-hour movie, because it basically goes straight through. And you, in television, when I work week to week, I kind of have to remind everybody, what's the story? What is the show about? I have, kind of a system of repeating information, which you don't need to do when you stream, because people aren't watching it. I saw this episode this week, I'm going to see the next episode next week. They're watching it all in, 2 or 3 days. So that's different.
Yeah, I have a theory. Those of us who are old enough to remember when TV went into rerun in the summer, and you had 12 weeks of reruns out of a 36-week, season.
Right,
So
right.
maybe your show would rerun, maybe it wouldn't. You sat and waited and wondered if you missed it. And before VCRs, and then VCRs came along, and at one time TV was very much everything was wrapped up within the episode. You didn't, and then the kind of nighttime soap opera emerged, where multiple storylines were carried out through the season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I mean, in Twin Peaks, suffered from, you solve it before the end of the season, kind of thing, and stuff like that. But today, I mean, think about that. You and I used to sit around waiting for something to come back and rerun, or a show broadcast on Monday, and we went to school the next day and talked about it, or people at work talked about it at the water cooler. And then a week later, you got the next episode, and you did the same thing. Now people can see the entire series in a weekend.
Often, yeah.
And I believe that your relationship with the characters is much different. I've binge-watched series that are 7, 8. I binge-watched Friends. I mean, sure, it took me, a few months to do that, watching it just about every day, an episode or 2 or 3. But I got through it faster than the 10 years that it took for the series to air. And I believe you develop, as a viewer, a relationship with the characters in the story that is significantly different over a 10-year period, a 10-year commitment to watching these characters versus a couple of months.
Yeah, for sure. It changes a lot. It changes the way that the shows are written. As I mentioned, it changes the way that the audience perceives it. And, we now are in a position where when a show comes out like Ozark, and we're waiting for that next, chunk to drop. And it's really, that's where that kind of commitment to a relationship with the show has gone to, where if you're going to come back to it, and you're ravenous about it. I mean, we did the same thing. Game of Thrones went away and came back. There are those shows that you really are looking to, kind of hoping for their return and when they return. But the ability to kind of sit down and watch an entire, beginning, middle, and end of a show is extraordinary. I find it, I don't know, it's not the only way to see a show, but I really think it's changed the paradigm on a lot of viewership. And I think it's going to continue to do that.
Well, and I would offer, and not everybody will agree with me on this, but I think television has far surpassed the movies in the ability to have a 10 episode or 8 episode or 13 episode season and have that arc go through the and or exist throughout the entire series.
Yeah.
That you can't do in 2 or 3 hours of
well,
movie.
there's absolutely no question that, particularly with the streaming services, that the quality of production and the cost and the money that's going into production rivals feature film,
right,
on every level. But as that happens, the way that the seesaw kind of works is that as television starts to push the envelope, you get into more of the big event movies. So Marvel has, James Bond, the DC movies, the big event movies where they're spending, 150, 250, $300 million to make one film. That's extraordinary amount of money that you put into a movie. And that's where we are now. So the studios are banking on that kind of film. And when COVID happened and a lot of the theaters shut down, actually all the theaters shut down and a lot of the theaters went bankrupt, in a strange way, it became an opportunity for the smaller filmmaker to have a window of kind of sneaking in, because the studios weren't making projects and they were focusing really on those big picture, big tentpole movies.
Well, and they do the tentpole movies because they can.
Yeah.
I mean, that you can't compete with that, really. I mean,
right.
How do you? So they have that kind of niche sewn up, but at the same time, I hope they get better at the tentpole movies. I mean, there are some really good ones, but I don't mean that as a, to diss that at all. But if the tentpole movies get really good, while television or streaming or whatever we want to call the other version of it, these series that you watch on on demand or however, is getting really, really good. I mean,
absolutely.
I can't even invest the amount of hours in my life to all of the good television.
That's one of the problems now. When we were growing up, you had 4 channels, if you included PBS, and you didn't have the issue of, well, gosh, there's so many choices. What I'm going to watch? It was what was on. You watched, you had your favorites on each show, and then in a way, it was kind of better for society because you were out playing in the yard because there wasn't anything on television. Now we're stuck in front of our TV. But I do think that there's, there is so much right now content being put out. Right now you're seeing Netflix, who's had some issues recently. They're pulling back. The financial aspects of, and we want to talk a little bit about film finance. The financial aspects of film finance and production are changing as well. And it's a real interesting game you play between how do I keep the prices low enough to make a profit and high enough to get the quality that will garner the audience. When you're talking about streaming, it's less important than it is when you're going to the theater or even on network television, where they count everybody and say, okay, we had 10 million people watch this. They're not as worried about that. They're looking for who's going to come to our streaming platform to watch Game of Thrones, who's going to come to our streaming platform to watch the Marvel, WandaVision, or who's, et cetera.
It's so different. I have a movie opening on Father's Day.
Oh,
congratulations. I have no idea. Nobody seems to know. It was supposed to open in theaters, and then it might be streaming. It could end up opening in a Walmart bin. I have no idea where it's going to open. Right. I asked the producer a couple of weeks ago. He said, I don't know. That's still being hammered out right now. I'm like, okay. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah. No, it's tough. And, this all kind of goes back to the idea of how do I get the money to fund my film? And right now there are kind of like 3 different, areas that you look at for what are you aiming for? And the first thing you have to ask yourself is, who's my audience? Who am I going to presenting this project to? You have a coibito, you have something that you want to put out there that you look at, do I have enough money on my own to make it? And, that's the paranormal activity model, where it took 15, used car sales price for making a movie. And it extremely well. 99% of those films that are made for that money don't do well, don't make it. But if you have the money and you can do it right, and you have something that's unique and can kind of capture the imagination, that's one way to do it. Then the next kind of step is friends and family, which is a little bit higher. And then it's about, how do I raise money? And one of the things that's changed a little bit is this idea of can you do crowdfunding? Do I have something that is going to be popular enough with a vast majority of the people out there that they would be interested in supporting this particular project? And there's both reward-based and equity crowdfunding that allows you to go to a lot of people for a little bit of money, pool it, and go and make your projects. And you can also, if you don't have, if you can't get the budget, you might be able to get your kind of like your pre-production money, your development money from that.
That's great points that you make. And I used to see crowdfunding stuff every single day. I would get either hit by somebody saying, "Hey, I'm crowdfunding," or it was
help me out.
Indiegogo or Kickstarter or something, or a friend of mine started one of them too, and she's busy with her her stuff, but I don't see it anymore. I mean, I rarely, and I don't know why. I mean, I'm just not. Once in a while, somebody on Twitter will say, "Hey, I'm doing this. Can you support it?" But not like it used to be.
Right.
And so has the nature of crowdfunding changed? There was a point at which the FTC was going to step in and allow investment or something like that.
So in 2016, the crowdfunding was created in 2012, and it was the Jobs Act of 2012. And what it said is just that you can go to a lot of people for a little bit of money, but there were two sections to it. One was reward-based, which is Indiegogo, Kickstarter, where you could say, "Hey, give me money, and I'll give you a T-shirt, or I'll give you a cup, or you can come visit the set." And that would be their reward. Or that it was just simply out of goodwill. Give me money because you like me, and I can go make my movie. So there was a lot of that. The upside of that is, as a filmmaker, I don't have to pay that money back. I don't owe anybody anything. I don't even actually have to make the movie. But on the downside of it, those people, they have no recourse if the film doesn't do well, if they, their money's just gone. So they created this other section, which at the same time, 2012, but the SEC didn't rule on how do you implement it until 2016. And what they said is they set a limit of $1,070,000. Why the 70,000, I don't know, but that's what they did. And you could go and you could raise $1,070,000 across the board. Normally, when you go to to talk to investors, they have to be accredited, meaning that they have to have, I think it's something like $1 million in assets and $200,000 a year in income. That wipes out about 85% of America. So when you talk about crowdfunding, it's whatever you can afford and whatever you want to spend. And up to $1,070,000, you did not have to be accredited. But there were all kinds of rules that you have to follow that have to do with SEC compliance. And it includes things like you have to have an attorney that vets all the material. You have to make sure that you're not making claims that aren't true. You have to make sure that all your risk statements are clear and correct. And when you advertise, there are only certain things you can say. So that was one of the things that had to do with the equity crowdfunding. There's one company that I know of that has been fairly successful in equity crowdfunding for films, and that's a company called Legion M. And they did a movie called Colossus. They did another one called Mandy. They did the Kevin Smith recent film where they went back to Jay and Silent Bob. I can't remember which one it was, but one of the Jay and Silent Bob movies. So they've had a fairly good run, and all of that from 2016. It's a tough road to go. You have to have $40,000, $50,000 to start off, and that's not including your marketing costs. And your marketing costs can be significant. So there are other ways of looking for money. Most of the places that I deal with, that I work with in terms of financing, they require skin in the game. So if you have a $10 million film, if you have $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, it's a lot easier, obviously, to get that second half. People are reticent to be the first one to jump in to anything that's unproven, which is one of the reasons that a lot of people really focus on intellectual property, a book that's been popular, a movie that's been popular, a play. even a song, a television series, whatever it is, that they can say, see, it already worked.
Right.
It did well. So now don't worry about how it's going to do, because it did really well. I mean, right now, I think Sonic the Hedgehog, which is based on a video game, is out, the second one.
Right.
Things like that. You're looking for ways of kind of circumventing this problem of, well, they don't know me, they don't know my work, they may like the script, but how, what can I do to encourage them to invest?
Well, but you raise another, I guess, another issue in that. First, let me say, in approaching anybody for money, you need to know what you're doing, because they know whether you know what you're doing or not. And if they're a savvy investor, they're going to know whether you've done your homework or your legwork, or,
Right.
I mean, that kind of thing. I mean, it only makes sense to be professional when it comes to money raising. It may be a little bit different with crowdfunding, or, asking your uncle, your aunt, or your mom or dad. Not so much, but
Uncle and aunt, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is, I mean, a lot of people just think, oh, I'm going to raise this money. And then they find out that they go to investors, and the investors are like, get out of here. You don't know what you're talking about. The other thing that I want to come back to the topic, but the other thing is people, when they crowdfund, I know that a lot of them got stuck because they didn't raise distribution fees and festival fees and all the money that they would need at the back end to promote they got their movie made, but then they couldn't do anything with it because they didn't have any money.
Yeah, sadly, that's not uncommon beyond the scope of crowdfunding. I as an executive in different companies, I've had many people come to me and say, hey, I'm in the middle of shooting, or I just finished shooting, and I need money to finish the film. Right. And a lot of times the question is, well, why didn't you raise the money initially? Because that becomes very expensive money. Because I've got you, not me personally, but the people who are going to invest in you, they have you by the short hairs. There's not a whole lot you can do. You're going to end up with something sitting on a shelf. And I know people. There was a gentleman who came to me from Dallas who was very proud of the fact that he had made his first film. He made it for $500,000, and he was thrilled. And I said, "Oh, that's great. Where is it? Where can I see it?" And he said, "Well, it's on a shelf in my closet." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, we didn't really know what we were doing. The sound isn't very good. And, so we haven't been able to get a distributor." And that's a problem. I had a young kid come to me at AFM, that's the American Film Mart, where a lot of people buy movies. And he had a movie, which I read the script, and it wasn't bad, but it needed some work. And I said, hey, work on it, come back and we'll talk. And it was a budget of $200,000. And he went away, made the film, came back 6 months and said, I finished the film. I was on time, on budget, made it for $200,000. Very excited. I've got a distributor who's going to give me a minimum guarantee of $200,000. So I'm at break even right off the bat, and I need $200,000. And I went, wait a minute, let me do the math here. You have $200,000, you spent $200,000. They're going to give you $200,000. What do you need the other $200,000 for? And they said, well, the minimum guarantee is based on our having a star in the film, and we didn't shoot any stars in the film. So we're going to recast one of the roles, reshoot all of his part, and we need $100,000 for the star and $100,000 for production and post. And I went, well, good luck.
Yeah.
Because now you've got a $200,000 film, which would have been worth $200,000, that you're going to try and turn into a $400,000 film. You're going to get $200,000 for it and have $200,000 be short. It's just not, mathematically, it didn't make a lot of sense. But that happens an enormous amount. And it's not just the people that do crowdfunding. These are, not necessarily doing any crowdfunding. So you really want to make sure that you think about soup to nuts. And one of the things, like right now, just the fact that we're still in a COVID pandemic adds 15 to 20% to your budget. And people don't realize that. And they do their budget and they think, okay, great, we've got a $10 million film. Well, that $10 million film is going to cost you $12 million because you've got to have a compliance officer, an assistant compliance officer. You have to have tests 3 days a week for everybody. And, depending on where they are, you have to have, personal protection gear. You have to have all of that stuff. So, those things, and if people need, if they need vaccines, then you got to pay for it, all of that stuff. So,
somebody called me up and asked me to do a commercial. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, as an actor, I had to get a COVID test. So I got a COVID test on Wednesday. the thing was on Friday, and I had a family emergency happen, and I had to leave. I mean, I had to get out of town. I had to go take care of somebody who was dying. So I called the company. I said, I can't do it. They were livid. I said, well, here, I've got there's a SAG actor. He can fill in for me. He goes, no. I go, why not? They go, we know who he is. He's fine, but we can't do the COVID test now. We don't have the time to do it. So now I'm the guy who's on their not so good list because I had to do something. I had no idea. I didn't realize it was that tight.
And you have to be prepared that if somebody tests positive, you got to shut down production or shut down parts of production. So there are a lot of things that can really affect that bottom line. So there's always, I was going to say, there's always it is a wise thing to do to make sure that you're covering your bases. My feeling is make sure you have every penny that you need. Make sure that you're not being ridiculous about how you're funding and how much you're putting in your pocket, but make sure that as much money as you can is going on the screen. But it's better to give back money to the investor than to go to an investor and say, I need another X number of dollars.
Well, I got to work with you on Bucky and the Squirrels, which was shot in Appleton, Wisconsin, directed by Alan Katz, friend of yours, and so you're familiar with filming in the state of Wisconsin. I have another friend who in 2009 had brought a $5 million movie to the state of Wisconsin because of the film incentives that had been passed in 2007, blah, blah, blah. Well, as a result, the then governor of Wisconsin stopped the film incentives on the end of the fiscal year, right? And retroactively applied them to a movie that was shooting. And they had to scramble to raise millions of dollars because they now no longer, and they had investors, and they had to try and pay their investors back because they were going to, the way their pay scale worked out was while they were making the movie, they were giving money back to the investors. And now they had to shoot the movie and raise all this additional finance at the same time. So when you talk about, the line producer, the producer being, on the edge and solving problems and things coming up, I mean, a lot of things can happen. And you got to be prepared. You got to have a contingency plan, essentially, and then understand there's really no contingencies. It's whatever
Yeah. And in my MO when I do a budget for a project is I do not budget any incentives into the budget because for that very reason. One is the states can change their mind at any time. New governor comes in. Whether it's, or if you're doing it internationally, a nation could change their mind about their incentives. The other thing is that, people see, there's a 30%, 35% incentive in, let's say, Louisiana. Well, that's fantastic. But if I get a $10 million film made in Louisiana, I don't get $3.5 million back. I only get what is qualified in the state. And it's never the full amount unless you're shooting with nothing but people in the state and using all of their equipment and and usually it doesn't cover cast. It doesn't usually cover above the line people, cast, writers, producers, directors. So because of that, the numbers that you think you're getting may not be the numbers you're getting at all. So you have to be very careful as a producer when you talk about how much it's going to cost. And again, I would rather say, I need $10 million. Now I'm going to get $2.5 million back from the state. I'll return that to the investor. So makes them happy. Everybody, goes away and you don't have to worry about that. The other thing to do, and this is one of the techniques that people do, is they pre-sell their incentives. So if I know I'm going to be shooting in Louisiana and I know I'm going to get $2.5 million back from the state on a $12 million film, I can go to different places and say, hey, you need a tax credit. I don't live here. I can't use it. Buy it from me. And a lot of places will buy it for 85, 90%, 90 cents on the dollar. So that is another way to finance your film. But again, you're taking a haircut of 10 to 15%. So you got to make sure you've raised enough money to cover that shortfall.
So let me ask you this. You teach and you consult and you produce and you direct and you do all these things. If somebody wanted to hire you as a consultant or as a producer or in one of the many hats that you wear, they get a hold of you through brianherskowitz.com?
Absolutely, they can, yes.
because you know your stuff. And I would, I mean, you know your business, and the point should not be lost on people who are listening now live or in replay, that if you're out trying to raise money for a film, you really have to know what you're doing. I mean, when you were that actor back in the 70s, and I was that actor back in the 70s, there were 2 contracts, and they were based on $2 million. I think it's $2 or $4 million. So $4 million was a big budget movie, and under $2 million was a low budget movie.
Right.
And independent films that Cassavetes that happened in the 70s were still, whatever their budgets were extremely hard to get made.
Right.
At that time, you had to buy stock, film stock, and all this stuff. But there were really only a couple contracts, for the actor essentially. But now there's a number of different contracts for the actor: low budget, ultra low budget, student, festival, professional, TV versus film, this, that, and the other thing. I mean, I've been hired on something. Oh, cool! I'm going to get this, only to find out, no, that's not the contract we have.
Right. So it's new media.
We have a modified budget, or we have it's an ultra low budget where, back in 1974, we used to make $172 and some change scale.
Right.
And now you can work in a movie for I think it went up to $125 or $140 now 140. Yeah. So that ultra low budget is now 140. Well, if you calculate inflation over the 40 years that's been,
you're losing a lot of money.
you're paying them to work.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, and when you're budgeting your films, that's also something to consider, whether you're doing union or non-union.
Right.
And if you're a union shoot, are you a union across the board? Are you just Teamsters? Are you IA? Are you going to be SAG? Are you going to be SAG-AFTRA? Are you going to be DGA? Are you going to be what union, WGA? And those affect everything.
Everything.
So, and those. So when you're talking about a non-union shoot, those tiers go away. Very few films don't use SAG actors.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's just most films do use SAG actors. So you have those platitudes that you have to reach in terms of, well, it's under I think it's $675,000 is
you can have SAG and non-union people working together. I mean, right. that had never been the case. I remember in 1988, Nike did a non-union commercial. They were advertising, and I was like, how did they get to do a non-union commercial? I've never heard of such a thing. Mm-hmm. And now there's non-union movies, there's hybrid movies of union and non-union. The world has changed. And so and in many ways it's opened up so that anyone can make a movie. I mean, anyone can shoot something on their phone. I mean,
I was going to say, you look at something like this that has a 4K camera in it, and right. You go, yes, it's a little bit like, if you got a scalpel, anyone can be a doctor, but however, it would be better if you know what places to cut. So it's a similar thing with the filmmaking industry. The fact that you have the tools right at your hand. It's certainly, if you have an interest and you have talent, the sky's the limit. It's the second part of it, the talent and the understanding.
Well, it was funny because when you said scalpel, I was going for hammer. Just because you have a hammer doesn't make you a carpenter. Exactly. So being a scalpel doesn't make you a doctor.
Yeah.
Having the technology to make a film doesn't make you a filmmaker. And I think the thing that is most dismaying to me,
mm-hmm.
if I had to speak in terms of what disappoints me the most, and I don't want to base it on me, but the people that I grew up with who wanted to be filmmakers loved
mm-hmm.
film. I mean, that was they would have given their arms to film things. They
Sure.
studied film, they studied the silence, they studied every era, they watched everything, read everything, they did workshop. And nowadays somebody goes, I got a phone, I'm going to go make a movie, and they don't know anything about movie making. They just said that they can.
Right.
And I would always encourage them to learn something. Now, returning to this topic of crowdfunding and of somebody who knows what they're doing, I have a friend who raised $10 million crowdfunding for the TV series The Chosen, which is yes, and so him. Dallas Jenkins and his family, very devout Christians, wanted to do a series on the life of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen the entire series. I think they're now in season 3. I've seen a couple of the episodes. Charming as all get out. It is really wonderful whether you believe in Jesus or don't. I mean,
right.
It's still good. I mean, he's a wonderful filmmaker, and they're doing a beautiful, beautiful job. Yeah. But because think about that. They didn't expect to raise 10 million, but they said, hey, we're going to do this series on Jesus. And
mm-hmm.
the audience that wanted to see it said, here.
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah,
so anything's possible.
it is so much about the marketing when you do the crowdfunding, because it's knowing, you have to understand who the audience is, target that audience and get the information to them and explain to them why, whether it's like, again, reward or equity based, where you're actually getting a piece of the film. Either way, you have to explain to them why they should want to be a part of that. And it can be very difficult and very expensive. But when you do something like that, it's rare. That's an amazing story, because it's very rare for a spec television series to be made. You know, you can. The only other person that I know of off the top of my head is what's his name, Perry.
Tyler Perry.
Tyler Perry, who was doing his, I think it was the Medea series back, 30 years ago, and was literally going from station to station saying, look, at night you have these hours, you need local programming, let me sell you my show. I got 40 episodes, give me X number of dollars, $1,500, $2,000, $5,000, whatever it was. And he got enough where he was making enough money to then turn around and make movies. And it was just a brilliant marketing ploy on his part, and incredibly, just genius the way that he did it. But that's not the usual path. You don't usually go off and shoot a series or develop a series and then go to a network or a studio and say, hey, we shot this series, do you want it? That's changing a little bit, and it's changing because of the streaming services. So if you have a 10-part series, you can go to Netflix and say, hey, take a look at this. And if they like it and think it's well done, they may buy it. But it's a gamble. It's a real gamble.
When it boils down to it, it's still a business. I mean, after, when all is said and done, there's an exchange of money, there's an exchange of value, there's an exchange of services. So it is a business. And I would encourage everyone who's wanting to be in the business to understand the business. I tell people now, I mean, I taught at the university, I taught navigating a career, how to work business of filmmaking. And I said, there are other people who teach you how to use a camera, or light, or direct, or edit and cut, and all I love teaching acting, but what I wanted to do was help people understand that it's a business, and how do you network, and how do you meet the people that are important to you, and how do you present yourself to them? You know what their textbook was from me? Think and Grow Rich.
Okay.
Napoleon Hill. I mean, that's what they said at first too. They're like, what does this have to do with filmmaking? I said, it's the concept of being able to succeed. It's knowing that you're going to have to persist. You're going to have to be consistent. You're going to have to take certain actions, and you're going to have to develop a personality that people want to work with.
Yeah.
In order to do that. And then they went, oh my God, this is an incredible class.
Right. And
then I would have people come in. I think you were busy at the time. I wanted to have you come in. I think we were streaming people in on Skype, but I think but so people would Skype in, and they got to interact and intersect with professional filmmakers.
Right.
And so it was fun. I loved teaching it, but it had to do with learning the nuts and bolts of what you're talking about and understanding it. So when you talk to the people or do a presentation, it's based on what they're expecting it to be like, not something that you think, oh, I can just go in there and convince them.
On that same note, Rex, one thing that has changed because of the pandemic, and I think will continue to be more available to people other than the people in Los Angeles, that before the pandemic, if you wanted to be a filmmaker and you wanted to network with people, you had to be in Los Angeles or New York, or someplace that was a major film capital where you could actually meet people, talk to them face to face. Well, when the pandemic hit and everything went kind of virtual and online, that changed. So now somebody from Wisconsin or St. Louis, they can find that person who they want to meet and navigate through the process of virtual meetings, discuss things with that person, whether it's through panels that they watch or different events, or if they just reach out to them through the social media channels that they can use to find people and explain to them what you want, what you're looking for, and who you are. So that's opened up a whole new world for people that I don't think existed 3-4 years ago.
Actually, in some ways, it does go back a little bit longer than that. But I think COVID really really accentuated it. When I left Los Angeles to be in Wisconsin, I would go back 3 months later and people go, "Oh, you're alive. We thought you died. You just kind of vanished, right? What happened to you?" And I would come back to Wisconsin and people say, "Does it bother you that you're not in Hollywood?" I said, "Well, I miss my friends. I miss the daily stuff. I'm always being videotaped, so that's not an issue. But the thing was, you couldn't network. I couldn't stay in touch with people the way did once social media happened. And so there was a period of, say, 8 years or 10 years or something where I was always this kind of fish out of water. I'd come back. Every time I was there, if I was there for a week or 2 weeks or months, when I would come back and live there for a while, I was busy. I was taking meetings every single day. I finally said, I'm only going to do 1 or 2 a day because I go from one to another to another to another to try and squeeze them in the available hours. Right. When like Facebook opened up and Twitter and these things opened up, suddenly I'm as well connected as I ever was, probably better, because I have the ability to stay in touch with people and or meet new people as a result of referrals or just having a presence. It was not available. It was not available before that year.
For sure. I'm right now, I'm working with someone, a company out of Atlanta, South Carolina, Florida, New York, literally all over the country. And, that's something that probably wouldn't have happened pre-COVID. Might have, but probably wouldn't.
Well, no, I agree with you in that regard. I'm just saying that the fact that there became this ability to connect
I think the difference was the tools were in place.
But you still had to sit down.
Yeah, I think people, needed that kind of that reality check that, hey, not only are the tools here, but you don't have to physically be in front of someone to have and it's interesting, people always, and particularly in this industry, there's always a little bit like trying to turn a large ship. It doesn't turn on a dime. And, I remember when we went from editing on film to editing digitally. Right. And there were still a lot of fantastic film editors who railed against shooting on editing on digital, and as there are directors now that are still a little reticent to shoot on digital. And it's because they like the feel of it, and they like the taking it on the back and forth and rolling the cut, and you can't quite do that on digital, although it's getting pretty close. But the fact of the matter is, it's so much easier and so much more efficient on digital editing. And the same with shooting. There was a TV show on HBO called Project Greenlight.
Right.
The last one that they did, I think it was the last one they did. There was a gentleman who won the competition, and he was offered the shoot, and he said, I want to do my own script. They had a script for him, and he said, I want to do my own script. And they said, okay. And then he said, and I want to shoot on film. And they said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll give you 2 extra days of shooting, or you can shoot on film. And he said, I'll shoot on film. Wow. It was the biggest mistake of any filmmaker I've ever personally watched. And the reason was he didn't gain any extra quality. It was taken on film, but aired on HBO. So it was digitized, shown on television. You weren't getting the idea of it was that 35 millimeter text. It wasn't on a big screen and in a multiplex. It was on television, and the quality suffered because of it. He didn't have as much time to work with the actors, didn't have as much time to plan shots. I just thought it was a huge mistake. So those things happen, and I think the same thing happened with this, where we have the ability. 5 years ago, somebody said, I'll meet you on Zoom, or I'll meet you on Facebook, or we'll do Google Meet. And you'd go, well, you're in town. Why don't we have coffee? Why don't we get together? And now it's like, now that those tools became not just something we could use, but something we have to use.
Well, and I completely agree. I draw the distinction between I'm connected well because of social media, but all of my meetings that I would ever had to take would go, when you come to town, let's meet. It was never
right. But not anymore.
But not now. Now I can have a meeting anywhere in the world from my home, wherever my home is.
Yes, exactly. One other thing I wanted to kind of just generally say about film finance, and I wrote an article, I'm sure it's out there somewhere. I know it was on Stage 32 for a while. And the title was Love or Money. And when you're out looking for financing for a project, there's only two reasons that anybody gets involved with you. And that is they're gonna make a lot of money because of what you're doing, or there is love involved, whether it's love of the cast, love of the director, love of the material, love of you as a person, or the subject matter. It can be any of those things, but without that element, they're not going to invest. And the other side of it is you say to them, you're going to make $100 million on this thing, and here's how we can show you why and how. That's the other reason. But those are the only two reasons. So when you start thinking about going out to look for money, look at, am I going to be able to find the people that love me, love this, or am I going to be able to demonstrate that this is going to be a positive money-making experience?
Yeah, no, that's such an excellent point. I was just trying to find out. There was I don't know if he's nominated for Academy Award or if he actually won an Academy Award. He's going to remain nameless either way, but gentleman that I got to meet and worked with a friend of mine on a feature film was completing the feature film. And he said, "What are you going to do next?" I'm going to the East Coast. I'm going to do this little movie, $7,000 or something like that. And they said, "They're paying you $7,000. I mean, this is a big star." He said, "No, that's the budget." He did it because he believed in the project. He loved the part. He was able to contribute. So somebody on the East Coast got an Academy Award nominated actor in their small little $7,000 project because the actor was convinced that this was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and the bigger the star and the more money they have, the less likely they are to do something because of the money.
Although their agent might say he can charge $7,000.
One of the reasons you want to get to know those people directly rather than the agents, because and agents have a fiduciary duty to want two things. If you make an offer to an actor, no matter how ridiculous, they are by law supposed to take that offer to the actor. Whether they do or not, that's a different thing, but they're supposed to. The other thing is they're the gatekeepers. They don't have any creative juice or any creative skin in the game. They're there to make money. So, and there was a really interesting thing that happened actually to Alan. He had a film, and there was I can't remember if it was an actor. I think it was an actor that was with William Morris or CAA or one of the big agencies that he wanted for his film. And he knew the agent very well who represented him. And the agent read the script and said, "I love it. I think it's a great script. I'm not going to take it to him." And he said, "Why won't you take him the script? It's perfect for him. He would love it." And he said, "Well, here's the problem. If he falls in love with the script and commits to it, he's passing on paying jobs and you don't have the money, and you're not going to use his name to go raise funds." But having said that, there are times when an actor will say, I like this project. I like this role. I'm committed to it. I'm working on a project right now that Malcolm McDowell is attached to, and Helen Mirren is being spoken to. So, those names, they're going to bring hopefully money to the table, and they attached before there was funds in place.
Wow, that's nice.
How that happens, you just have to kind of keep, knocking on the door and hoping that some point it opens.
Well, you raised so many good points, and I think there's a certain power in being positive and connecting with people. And the worst that can happen is someone can say no, but you also should make a professional presentation and know what you're doing. I wanted to go back to we're a little long on the show, and we'll go a few more minutes. But you said nowadays there's this kind of rush for intellectual property, and there's those bidding wars too. I mean, in other words, somebody say, "Well, I'll give you $1, for the rights, or $100 or something." But now when people understand that the rights to something might be valuable, or that I don't want to tie my rights up for a year for a little bit of money when I could be getting more money. I mean, can you talk about the what it's like to acquire property at this point?
Yes, it's a little bit all over the map, and it really has to do again with, what kind of material you're looking at, how popular that material is, how old it is. I have a couple of projects that I'm producing that are based on books that were bestsellers 30 or 40 years ago. Doesn't really have the same impact that, a Harry Potter book would have, for example. Oftentimes when you reach out to an author like that, and again, it depends on whether they have an agent that's representing them and what the agent's, how gracious the agent is. But there are people that will say, okay, give me $1,000 for an option. And then within that option, there is a payment that is more appropriate should something happen with it. But it's usually a shopping agreement or a limited option for a year or 2, 3 years.
Oh, that's awesome. There's a good guy, filmmaker. He has a show on, I think it's now every Friday, called Lunch Therapy. I was a guest. My sister's been on a number of times. Joel Marshall is actor, producer, stand-up comedian. His wife is a producer and activist. I mean, they're really wonderful people. Says, how does one go to Netflix?
Well, it's right off of Sunset. So you can take Bronson, take a left. No, money low. Okay.
It goes back to apparently our conversation about The Chosen.
Yes, exactly. Netflix, that's a good question. I actually recently, I'm a member of the Producers Guild, and we had a panel very recently that was a 2-part panel that was called Selling to Netflix. And one of the things that they talked about is this question: how do we get to you? How do we get to Netflix? And unfortunately, the answer is through your representation. So if you don't have an agent, you're probably not going to have much luck. You can, on occasion, if you have an entertainment attorney and they have a relationship with Netflix, you can get to them that way. But normally, they won't look at material unless it's through an agent. Now, here's the other exception, and this is the back door, but it is throwing darts at a dartboard that is very, very far away. And that is if you have a project that is entered in and does well in a major festival. So if you go to Sundance, you go to Toronto, you go to South by Southwest, and you win an audience award, or you win, that opens up doors. And they go to those festivals. So they'll have representatives at all of the festivals there. And if there's something that catches their eye, they'll buy it. So for example, I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe Coda was a film that was an independent film that was shot, produced, that was seen by Netflix and then purchased. And then what Netflix does when they have something like that is they brand it as a Netflix original. Bird Box is another one that I think they did on.
Or Money Heist, the series.
Well, Money Heist was a series in Spain, and they looked at it and went, that's kind of interesting. Let's bring it in. And then
four more seasons.
Or Squid Games is another one.
Right.
And sometimes, it's a little bit of a, chicken and the egg. Sometimes because right now Netflix has offices all over the world. So, there's Netflix Brazil, there's Netflix, Italy, they're everywhere. And they may have actually produced some of those projects, but their acquisition is still a little bit more their strong suit. They're still going to be looking for things to acquire. But again, they've had some issues recently, so they backed off significantly, where they were spending, I don't know, $2 billion a year on content. They may be doing half of that. They may be doing a quarter of it.
Well, I mean, I'm convinced that it's easier to pre-sell something than it is to sell something you made that nobody wants. It's a lot of people make stuff.
I'm not sure I agree with that, Rex. I think that pre-selling is as tough as anything, honestly.
Well, I mean, it's always tough. But what I'm getting at is I would rather try and pre-sell something and not make it an inferior project that nobody wants to buy.
Sure, if you can do that, for sure. And
right.
And there are still some distributors, some places where you can go and you can get minimum guarantees or have work pre-sold, but it's not easy. And a lot of it goes back to two things. Is it an intellectual property that somebody recognizes, or Do you have attachments that people recognize? And if it doesn't have one of those two things, the likelihood of getting it pre-sold just drops significantly.
Well, it goes back to it being a business.
Yeah.
And their bottom line is $1 and what they can sell. And if your project is something they think they can sell, they might go with it, whether it's pre-made or pre-sold. I mean, but that all said, I had a friend. I mean, I'm going to give a backstory first, then I'll tell you about my friend. In 74, I could walk into almost any producer's office in Hollywood that I wanted to. I could say, could so-and-so, I'd like to see, I'd like to read for this. I had no problem getting in. Some were big names. I was producing at 23. And so then I got a lot of open doors. It was really nice until my project fell apart and then all the doors slammed shut and nobody wanted to talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
But around 1977 or so, things changed. It went from being, you can submit, you can walk on the lot, you can drop this stuff off, to, nope, you have to send it in.
Right.
So you could mail in a submission, you could do that. Then it changed again to only your representation could send in this. And then as a result, some people attributed to Art Buchwald and the whole Eddie Murphy thing. And he said only represented screenplays will be, I mean, in other words, they're worried about lawsuits. They're worried about, stuff. So there are gatekeepers, and knowing how to get to the gatekeeper. That's why, some of the best advice is be really nice to the receptionist.
Everybody. Yeah. I learned that lesson the hard way. I did. I was working on a series. I did a bunch of episodes of the legendary journeys of Hercules. And one of the assistants was this young kid, and he was, really nice. I liked him a lot. And he was not unintelligent, but I didn't know who he was or why he was there. And suddenly who I thought was like an intern was giving me notes. And I was like, why are you giving me notes? Who are you? And his name was Alex Kurtzman. And he later became just a huge writer producer. And I was like, oh, I probably should have been nicer to that kid. And I went, oh yeah, that's my bad. That's my bad.
No, indeed. No, treat everybody nice. The old saying that you learned in Hollywood, you treat them nice on the way up because you'll pass them on the way down.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been really, really valuable and really useful. But before we go, a friend of mine actually got himself a special on Netflix.
Oh, fantastic.
Street magic, kind of like David Wayne, and he got one on. He may not have made a dime off of it. I don't know if they paid him for it or they just aired it for him. But either way, in that regard for him, if he got to book gigs or got notoriety from thing, it served a purpose. If nothing else, it was a calling card, but a fairly impressive calling card. He had a show on Netflix, or it was a one-off. I mean, it wasn't a series. And but I haven't asked him how he did it or what he did or anything. I'm just assuming, that there was, but it never hurts to ask. It never hurts to pursue, and to go for it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in a coffee shop and the person next to you, and this is one of the reasons why you want to be in LA, is if you're in a coffee shop and this person sitting next to you, sees you reading a script and says, what do you do? And I say, I'm a writer. And they say, well, I work for Netflix. What are you writing? Now you have an open door. So those kind of things, they happen on occasion. Actually, there's a film called, what was it called? A friend of mine named Joel Eisenberg produced a film. And it was about the Columbine massacre, the shooting. And he was at the AFM early and sitting at a bar. And there was a woman sitting there and she was going through some material and they started talking. And she said, what are you doing? What are you working on? And they ended up making that movie. So, those things, it's rare, but they do happen. I mean, you'll hear everything. I preface everything with it's rare because it's rare, but they do happen. And, it's not necessary to be, like I said, in person. You can still talk to someone and say, this is what do you do? How can I help you? What do you want? This is what I'm working on. And sometimes there's synergy there that allows you to, move forward with your project.
Well, I miss that on a daily basis. I miss the smoke-filled back rooms of Dupars and Tiny Nailers and all the late night 24-hour coffee shops where writers were sitting with their legal pads writing furiously their screenplays before the days of computers. Joe Treckel, the actor, is a friend of mine. He's 90-some years old.
Wow.
Apparently still wanders. I shouldn't say wanders, but walks around Santa Monica. We used to have breakfast together. He was a bartender in The Shining. He was the doctor in Blade Runner. That kind of, he would take his typewriter down to Santa Monica, like on Ocean Avenue, and sit and type his screenplays in the mid-morning afternoon hours.
Right.
Those days, before computers, it wasn't an electronic typewriter, but he would go type at the beach essentially to get his screenplays done. Sure. But nowadays, but you're right, because you'd be somewhere and somebody say, "Are you an actor? Are you a writer? You're doing something," and before you know it, you're forging a friendship or something. So in Wisconsin, I don't run into filmmakers that often in coffee shops late at night. So it's a different world. So some still have to be where the business is.
Oh, for sure. And whether you're doing Paranormal Activity or Forrest Gump or Infinity War, there's kind of a path that you can take to get to that endpoint, and it goes through knowledge, information, and having material that is excellent. You can't just be good. It's got to be excellent. But if you have excellent material, your chances of succeeding are increased exponentially. One of the problems that I think a lot of people have is the material they start off with is not good. They end up shooting something that's at very best mediocre, and then they wonder why aren't I making money off this movie? Why is it how come I'm not in a mansion in Beverly Hills? And it comes down to because I said before, it takes a village, and the truth is it takes very few people to screw up a film, and it takes everything going right to make it work and become a hit. That's just a beautiful way of putting it. It doesn't take much to screw it up, but it takes everything to make it work. Yeah, and I was offered a teaching gig at a school called I think it was called Hollywood International Film Academy, HIFA, and the guy who ran it interviewed me for his website, and one of the first questions he asked is, how do you write a screenplay that wins an Academy Award? And I said, you don't. You write the best screenplay you can write, and if everything lines up perfectly, maybe you win an Academy Award. But nobody, I don't care if you're William Goldman, I don't care if you're Charlie Kaufman, I don't care if you're, Scorsese, it doesn't matter. You cannot write an Academy Award winning script. All you can write is the best script you can write. Maybe you do that, it wins and maybe it doesn't. So whenever you're sitting down to do things, you can't think about, and this is why my book is called Process to Product, because one of the problems I think with a lot of people is they focus on, I want something that's going to win an Academy Award. I want something that's going to make $1 gazillion. You don't have any control over that. You have no control over that. What you have control over is, what does that character do right now? What does that villain do to stop that character when that character does that? What does Donna do when she comes into the room and sees the guy from across the room? Those kind of stuff. That's the only thing you have that you can control. And you got to let go of everything, making it the best it can be. That's my opinion. Well, I love that, and I'm gonna take that as the final word, unless you have another final word, because that's a perfect way to wrap this up, and that's to do and be your best, or be. That would be my pleasure. Thank you. And please, if anybody is interested in Conceptus, if I might. No, go for it. I was gonna say, we'll get it off there. There we go. How do we do it without that? Wherever books are sold, right? Online, yes, or Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any place online. And I think if you read it, drop me a note over at my website at brianherskowitz.com. Let me know. I'd love to hear. Thank you, Jake. Absolutely. Well, I have certainly enjoyed this. And if people want to reach out to hire you or are interested in your expertise in all these various areas, there's brianherskowitz.com right there. And for those, we haven't said this during the show, but please continue to leave comments wherever you're watching this, like the show, subscribe to the show, and push it out there. Share it to your other filmmakers and friends and family and anyone, because when you do that, it's like sharing means caring, but it helps all of us who, you were going to say something? I was just going to say, if anybody's interested, I do little videos on TikTok writing tips. If you're interested, you can always follow me on
TikTok. You have a TikTok name there?
I think it's Brian Herskowitz Books.
Okay. Well, they can search your name on TikTok and they'll
should come up.
All right.
Well, several of me.
Awesome. Well, hopefully it won't be too much longer. We'll be able to share bagels again or work together something again. I've thoroughly enjoyed having you on the show today. Hang around in the green room for a little bit while I close out the show. And thank you so much for sharing today.
Thank you.
Mr. Brian Herskowitz, and go to brianherskowitz.com. Get his books from Amazon or wherever you can find them. Process to product. No, I'm going to screw it up. But at any rate, let me bring him back.
Yes.
The process to
product.
Oh, I had it right.
You got it perfectly right. Here, I happen to have that one too.
Right, and I have the book, and I was like, I just didn't want to misstate the title.
Is it backwards?
Very, very cool. All right, so we'll see you again. Anyway, I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank you for caring. I want to thank you for sharing. I want to thank you for being here. I am also going to tell you about my book, and the fact, and the reason I do, it's Life on Your Terms. It's by me. Yesterday, I was interviewed by Joe Vitale, who's got a quote right here. It says, "Eye-opening and empowering Dr. Joe Vitale, author of The Miracle, star of The Secret," and a bunch of people on the back. So, and I don't know if Joe's on the back, but he's certainly in the book as well. You can get this book, Life on Your Terms, at rexsikes.com/book. Here's the deal. You buy the book from Amazon, hardcover or a paperback, and then you take your receipt code and you go back to that website /book, rexsikes /book. You put in your receipt code, and I gift you a $497 online bonus training called The Mastery Loop, something I've been teaching for 30 years on how you master your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors and your skills so that you can go forward further and faster in life. So get Life on Your Terms and get the bonus training, The Mastery Loop. All right, so we're here every Thursday. I've got another exciting guest next Thursday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern time, and wherever that is in your locale. You've been watching All Things Rex Worldwide with my guest, Brian Herskowitz. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for sharing the show, and I'll see you the next time. Now, as I always say, if you think of things as a problem, they'll be considered a problem. If you think of things as a blessing, they will be a blessing. So go ahead and celebrate everything.